So today, I was planning to start Ephesians, which we said in the last video. We're going to start Ephesians next week, or who knows. I'm doing something a little bit different today, and I want to preface by saying that this video here, this is a biblical video, but this is an opinion video. This is an observation that I've made, that me and Richard here talked about, that the only reason I'm teaching it today is I think it kind of goes with the topic that we were finishing on about the apostasy, the time of the Gentiles ending. And it's a little food for thought. Like, if anybody happens to see this video, if you disagree with any of what I'm saying, that's fine. I mean, this is not like heavy doctrinal based, thus saith the Lord. Maybe I'm going to be wrong on a couple of these points, but I know I'm not wrong on the entire point. And I honestly, I think everything is correct, but it's interesting. It's kind of a philosophical discussion on, we've talked before about how delayed maturity has destroyed families and how it's ruined society. Okay, but one thing that I was having this discussion, I think it was with Richard, and we were talking about how people now in their 20s and 30s are dating in a bizarre way, right? Like they're still looking for someone that validates an image, and they're looking for someone that's popular. And so then in this conversation, I was saying, people my age didn't do this, right? And then I said, wait a second. They did, but there was one thing that was different. And the key difference is they stopped doing it when they were 19. They did in high school. Like in high school, it was based on who was popular, who made you look good, who fit in with your group. And then by the time they went to college, people were thinking more about their religion, whom, they might have thought a little bit about their family. It's not that they were necessarily focusing on the deepest things in the world, right? But now, who people choose to date, I think it isn't just dating, it's how you make friends. It is the political divide that we have in the country. Like it's almost kind of strange that the extremists of both political parties honestly thinks that they need to fight to get 100% of their way. And then, as we know, this leads to fascism and dictatorship. And, because if like right now, say I need one of you to help me with something, right? And I need to demand it, right? Because I'm in a bad spot. I can't do that every week, right? If I say, oh, that works, after a while, you feel like, you feel like the other person that's doing the help can feel like they're taking advantage of. So even if you need something in life, if you want something in life, you learn that you have to compromise and allow other people's opinions to matter. So like if you look at like the trade war, for instance, with Canada, right? They have a little bit of an advantage with us on lumber and gas, right? Okay, so if you there's 30 million Canadians, 340 million Americans. So if you look at what was actually spent before the trade war, Canadians spent $8 on American goods to every dollar that Americans spent on Canadian goods. Well, you can't then demand, okay, you're giving us 8-1, now we're going to do tariffs, and we want to make sure that lumber is 100% favorable to us. You do that, you end up losing the customer that is...
Which is what we've done.
Which is what we've done, right. Which is part of what made me think of this. And so then I got thinking, okay, so if the church age ended in 1967, if you look at the things that I've diagrammed, is that the baby boomers as a whole I believe, at least in the modern times, was the most fun generation, right? They experienced life the most. They made everything more enjoyable, but they did it at a cost of sin, right? And then I think my generation, the Xers, were similar to the baby boomers, except they weren't as much fun, a little bit more focused on finances and money and stuff like that. I mean, Xers did make the world better, but it wasn't as exciting as what the baby boomers did. Then if you look at the two younger adult generations, the millennials and Gen Z, they're not really having fun, and they were brought up with all these fears, and a lot of how they live their lives as adults is based on fears. So what I believe, and I'm saying this isn't a fact, this is my opinion, is there's like 4 stages of development that a person needs to go through. Okay? So the first one is being like an infant. And once you get into like age 4 or 5, you start to get more. An infant just knows what he or she needs, okay? And then once you're 4, you're somewhat aware of, you learn self-awareness, okay? So from the time that you're like,
I don't know what 4-year-olds you're looking at.
you're starting to,
18-year-olds don't have self-awareness.
Well, we're gonna get to that.
yeah. So
it's supposed to go, or how it used to.
right, so you start to, so when you're a little child, you're not really an independent thinker. You're basically relying on your friends and your family, and you're saying, okay, what does dad want? What does mom want? What does my friends want? And you base your opinions on what's popular in your family, and you're also trying to develop a self-identity when you're younger than 12, okay? Now then what happens is around about age 13, you start to hit puberty, and then you start to get hormones, and then your body starts to develop, okay? And when your body starts to develop, like if you look in the agricultural society, if you're a boy, you're capable of plowing the field, you're capable of working, you're actually capable of helping to earn a living and keep your way. If you're a woman at this age, you start to become capable of cooking, cleaning, taking responsibility around the house, say during the agricultural time. Mm-hmm. And then you also have the physical ability to have kids. Most people did not have kids at age 14, although it did happen. My grandmother, I think, was 14 when my father was born. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, then your body. So what happens is when your body develops in puberty, those extra feelings also give you more feelings for other people. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the hormones, in particular, give you the most feelings for people of the opposite sex. But also, if you're out working, then instead of just focusing on yourself and your identity, you become more aware of other people. Because
you gotta cooperate.
Yeah, you need to cooperate with other people. You typically don't farm the field by yourself.
Right.
I'm not a farmer, so I don't know the details, but you basically need someone to help with the machinery, someone to help with the yard, the land, and everything else, and putting things away. So when you hit that adolescent cycle, you then start to notice other people, and then you get more of a feeling from other people because you appreciate what other people are doing. So you get more physical feelings for them, you get more mental feelings for them, and then you're also more aware of what's enjoyable in the world. Because you're out there and you're working hard and you're earning things, you're starting to see, I like this food, I like this person, I like this people, I like, like
place that you never.
You're more aware of things that you enjoy and things that you like. So then the way that our bodies are made is that your body continually develops till you're about 25, right? And so then after about age 18 or 19, say you have a family and you get married, if you look at the way that a woman carries a baby and brings forth a baby, this is a physical representation of something that makes you selfless. So the thing that typically makes the man selfless was being responsible for his wife and kids, and the things that would make the woman selfless is carrying this baby in her for 9 months and then seeing the innocent child come out of her. Then instead of her focusing on what she wants and what's going to make life enjoyable, she then is enamored with the innocence and the needs of the child. And then by then focusing on the child, the woman gets off self. And by the man focusing on the woman and the child, he gets beyond self. So I believe that like on self-reflection, I see that my biggest weakness in the flesh, or in the world, if you will, like the Apostle John says, what's in the world? The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Is I think that for myself, and I think maybe 80% of the population, or 60%, lust of the eyes is a compelling thing. If something is pleasing to the eyes, you put that above everything else. You say, because this is what I enjoy, right? Mm-hmm. Then when you see somebody in your life that is selfless, that has character, you then say, wait a second, this is more important than what stimulates my eyes. And then that matures you to another level. So what's interesting, I think the modern culture, the way that we earn a living, the way that we educate ourselves, is I think if you first start with the baby boomers, I think they hit adolescence kind of in a normal way, but because the economic prosperity of the 50s and the 60s, they didn't have, they didn't feel the need to be selfless. They started going to college, the women started working. So I think that they did not really progress beyond the third phase of development. And I'm not saying this is 100%. I mean, certainly there's some that did, right? And so I think they lived their entire adult lives in that fun mode that you're supposed to start doing at age 14 and 15. That's how they created the world's funniest comedians. They created the greatest fashion. They created the greatest food because they were perpetually trying to enjoy life. And then in so doing, the Gen Xers didn't have any supervision of any kind, growing up. And then they look back and they say, I'm surprised I didn't die. So then when they had kids, they're like, I don't know if I want that kid to be able to climb every tree in the neighborhood like I did, blah, blah, blah. So then Gen Xers started this helicopter parenting thing, and they were afraid of their kids maturing. They were afraid of the consequence of maturity. So as a result of this, they didn't want their kids to be around anything that had any potential for any danger of any kind. So the kids did not have any responsibility as teenagers, so they did not learn how to be responsible for others. And I think that society as a whole, I think most Gen Z and millennials never made it to the adolescent phase of maturity. I think they're still in the pre-adolescent. And then if you look at it, they look at like flirting as a sign of harassment. And then they were taught, don't ever talk to strangers. So then they become adults and they're like, we think it's immoral to engage in a relationship with anybody 3 years older than me, right? And then if you take a 12-year-old, do you want a 12-year-old to be responsible for a kid and a family? So if you look at Gen Z, they don't really want a family. And then if you try to engage in a discussion with a 12-year-old, they're not critical thinking yet at age 12. At age 12, you cannot know if someone's telling the truth. You don't have great discernment. You go to what your parents think or what your friends think. So if you look at the age of social media, people are saying, what is popular in my group? And then that's what I believe. You know, this is how we have the Trump phenomenon, or this is how we have the Me Too movement, the progressive movement, where we got to defund the cops and everything else. Like if somebody in the group has a radical opinion, it takes maturity to get discernment. Like on my crew, my best worker does not do one of his primary jobs the way that I want. Exactly, right? Okay. Well, after trying to be successful for years and years and years, I say, wait a second, this is the best guy I've ever had working for me. It's frustrating that his quality isn't as good as I want, but how intelligent would it be for me to fire him and do all of the hard work that he does that makes my life easier just because he's not doing that thing the way that I want?
Right.
Also, if you get upset when you're a kid, you then look for other people to justify why you're upset. So I think what's happened is that the modern technology of the way that we live, because of all the fears, because we were afraid for kids to become adults without realizing it, they never became adults. And then what we're seeing in society now is the result of an immature society. And the immature society does not have independent thought, cannot step outside of the group. Like I remember when you and I first started this journey of trying to rebuild the church, we had false accusation after false accusation after false accusation levied against us. I remember thinking, okay, the people that are close to us, in enough time, they're going to appreciate us. They're going to respect us because they're going to see that all of these accusations weren't true, right? Well, that was completely wrong because the people didn't mature. So people weren't looking for the truth. Like if they didn't like us based on a false accusation, then what would happen if we still weren't popular 10 years later, then fitting in with that group, which is what's really important if you're 12, was still the most compelling thing. So then the truth didn't matter. If you look at a 12-year-old, truth doesn't matter that much to a 12-year-old.
Right.
They want to do what's true, but they are trying to fit in with their peers.
Yeah. If everybody doesn't like Billy, it doesn't matter whether he's a good kid or not. We're not going to like him.
But once you start taking responsibility, truth matters a lot more.
That's true.
So like on my crew, my best worker matters a lot. You know, I'm not going to nitpick every single thing he does because his very existence makes my life a lot better. If I thought like a 10-year-old, I might not think that way. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
And, but because I'm out there working hard every day, and then this guy working hard every single day, if when I had the heat rash, he took over the wand and finished off the day for me. If something's wrong with my machine, he's going to fix it. If I need whatever I need done, he's going to do, right? So we can find stuff that we don't like. Okay? So I think the same thing is true in the real world. Like you see it in politics. If you look at like people, when you look at like younger people wanting to buy a house, not only a house has gotten ridiculously expensive, but then they don't want starter homes. They say, if I'm going to have a house, I need to have this backyard, I need to have this place for my boat, I need to have this, or else I'm not
You're going
interested.
to pay $500,000 for it. So if you're going to pay $500,000 for it, you might as well enjoy it. If not, why not
But
keep
then
paying
what
rent?
you want's going to cost $1 million.
But the way we thought, even though I didn't accomplish this when I was young, is we thought you start off with like a little condo or a trailer.
Right, which still costs $300,000.
Right, then you pay that off
So at that point,
Then
why
you-
not have something nice?
because you might be able to afford the thing that's cheaper.
Right.
But if you think like a
You can't
10-year-old,
if it's 300,000.
well, if you see like a 10-year-old, they don't compromise. I want my candy,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and,
Well, you can have it after you eat your dinner.
and good character doesn't matter to a 10-year-old.
Right.
Right. So the other thing we thought, like rebuilding the church is like, if you're good to someone, they'll like you more. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's true for the most part with a kid, but a kid is a little more focused on their group.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So a kid isn't, so like some stranger isn't going to be nice to a kid and the kid say, oh, wow, that's great. But once you're out plowing the field, some stranger comes and says, do you need a hand with that? Or you're like, oh yeah, thank you very much. And it's like you then appreciate, once you start adding responsibility in life,
Mm-hmm.
then you appreciate other people's talents.
Yeah.
And then once you start appreciating other people's talents, you then start to discern other people's character. But if you never have any responsibility, then you're stuck with what makes me look good, what justifies me, and what do most people think? What does everybody else think? You need responsibility to mature beyond that mindset. And I think if you look at the nature of how we're made, the old saying, you got to crawl before you can walk. One thing that's not said is that it's a lot more enjoyable to walk than to crawl. So if you don't mature, you're not actually enjoying life. The first 30 years of your life, unless you have a catastrophic illness that if say you're normal, right? Each year, your life is supposed to be better than the year before. Now, because of the curse of sin and aging, it starts to change at 31, approximately. I mean, and I don't mean this like 100%. It could be 30, could be 25, or it could be 35, depending on how you live, genetics, stuff like that. But I'm using 30 as a general term. So say once you start to turn 31, your body starts to break down. Now then people that are afraid of everything, afraid of their kids becoming adults, think that every aspect of growth is a danger and is bad. So you don't get the joy of getting feelings from other people. You don't get the joy of being selfless for another person. And your and so not only does it cause the discrimination and the polarization and the hatred in society, but I think it also makes it impossible to become a whole person by hindering the physiological growth that our bodies were designed to do. Like if you look at, most people say you shouldn't have a kid till you're 30. So if you take like a dog, I don't know, what is it, age 2 to age 7? What would...
Yeah.
So no one says, this dog will not have puppies until they're 6. You know what I mean? Is it going to benefit the dog if you treat it like a puppy till they're 6?
Yes. They all have a much better life.
I don't...
People treat puppies better than dogs.
I actually think the animals forming relationships with other animals makes them happier.
True.
And if you look at all the animals in the wild, the mother, even the most gruesome animals like lions, the mothers really love their cubs. Mm-hmm. They mark their scent on all their cubs. They look after all their cubs. Meanwhile, some other animal comes by, boom, they eat their throat, right? But they're really nice to their cubs. And elephants are pretty harmless people until you start messing with their little baby.
Yeah, you're gonna die.
And you will too. If they
Yeah.
get anywhere near you, they'll never stop.
Right.
So it's important to go from crawling to walking. It's important to develop a self-awareness. Then it's important to develop responsibility, and then it's important to then move into full-blown adulthood and have critical thinking. But if you have not hit the developmental stages, then you're going to miss out on all those things. So I think the way that we're raising kids now, they're not able to actually be adolescents. We've made the 12-year-old mindset perpetuate into perpetuity as adults. And if you think I'm wrong, what you can do is look at old yearbooks from the 50s, look at old videos from the 50s, look at somebody in the 50s that's talking that's like 15, 16 years old, and look at their maturity compared to a 15-year-old today. Look at someone from the 60s that's in their 20s, compare, even in the entertainment world, listen to a Barbara Streisand song from the 70s when she's in her early 20s and compare that to a singer of today. Look at how people dress, look at how people took care of things. Now then you could say, okay, we did all this to make people happier. Has people not taking on responsibility made society happier? And not only that, I think that the inflation and the expense that makes families impossible is also a part of the same problem. Because, say for instance, you build my house and I fall off the steps, okay?
Mm-hmm.
If we're not trying to be responsible for ourselves, then I say, oh, it's got to be your fault. You're the one that made the steps.
Right.
Okay, so then you have insurance. So then if I sue your insurance company, I get $1 million. The insurance company says, I don't want to keep paying up these payments. We're going to go to the local zoning board and we're going to say, how are these steps supposed to be made? And we're going to design them in such a way that we're not responsible if this happens. And then the zoning board. So then if the town did this and I fall and I get hurt again, then I can't sue you, can't sue the insurance company. I then sue the zoning board. So then so then basically what's happened is we have so many regulations to alleviate responsibility that just the cost of living has gotten out of control. It's got expensive. Only the top 10% of people can afford a lifestyle that just a generation ago, the top 70% could afford. And so I think that the fears of being sued are a byproduct of not taking responsibility. I think the fear culture is afraid that your kids, if they form relationships with people that you don't know, you think something dangerous can happen. If they take responsibility, if they're out working, like I started my business when I was 14, as did, Ben did a similar thing, right? That gives you a sense of responsibility and a sense of connection with other people. I think a lot of parents are afraid, well, what if this homeowner takes advantage of my kid? I don't want them to be around, kids. I heard a story years ago. I don't know if it's true or not, but like a third of millennials' parents come with them to job interviews. So then they're basically not thinking that the kid is capable. And I don't know about you, but the things I learned the most in life is from mistakes.
Absolutely.
And so when you start to develop and make responsibility, like when I seal driveways, I dumped sealer and it got all over the guy's garage and I had to fix his garage. So then I learned, okay, I got to get this little, I made this little milk jug and poured it lightly so that I didn't spray it in front of the guy. And I first learned to drive the truck. I backed my truck into some other guy's truck, so then I learned, okay, I got to be more careful when I when I do this, I've made mistakes, driving in the snow and almost killed myself, and then that's how I've learned how to navigate dry ice and others. And the same, not to keep mentioning Ben, but he gone through the same thing, got a little accident from dry ice. Okay, then you learn, okay, I made a mistake that time. You got to be a little more sensitive, to the weather. So if your parent tries to shelter you from every single one of those mistakes, then what happens is you never develop as a human being. So then by not developing, you don't get the joy of getting beyond self and feeling other people's emotions and feeling other people's virtue and feeling other people's talents. And when you make friends, some friends use you, some friends stick to you like closer than a brother, some friends are there because they feel that you benefit them. And I think that we all need to grow through that in life. Your parents can't control all of your friends. You pick people that you date. You learn, this person was using me. Oh no, I broke up with this person. That was a big mistake. Like I've had people that I should have married that I didn't. I had people that I tried to marry that I shouldn't have. I've had relationships that I was excited about that were wrong. I had relationships that I wasn't excited about that I look back and I'm like, why didn't I marry Nicole? It's like she was, or some other girl, and so then you get thinking, okay, now if I find another person that's like this, I'm not going to make that mistake again. Mm-hmm. Whereas if your parents, if you just, even if it's not just your parents, if you just say, I'm just going to do what my friends say, then you never learn anything on your own. Mm-hmm. Like to get to maturity, you got to be persuaded by the truth. You've got to see people for who they are and not subject them to your image. Okay, as I said, this particular study is 100% opinion based, but I do have a few verses that I looked up.
This gets open himself.
That I looked up that I thought was relevant to the process. Okay, so first one is in Isaiah 3. Just three. Starting in verse 1. Okay, here Isaiah is describing what happens to a society in a time of judgment. Starting in verse 1, it says, For behold, the Lord of hosts, doeth take away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stay and the staff and the whole stay of bread and the whole stay of water. See, I think this is actually relevant to today because everything's so expensive, people can't afford anything, right? Mm-hmm. Verse 2, The mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet, the prudent and the ancient, where people aren't appreciating people's talents, they're not appreciating the eloquence of the renowned people. The captain of 50, the honorable man, the counselor, the cunning artificer, and the eloquent orator. And I'll give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them, and the people shall be oppressed. Now you can see in our political world that people are trying to make themselves oppressed, right? Everyone by another, and everyone by his neighbor. The child shall behave themselves proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable. When a man shall take hold of his brother of the house of his father, saying, Thou hast clothing, be thou our ruler, and let this ruin be under thy hand. And that day shall he swear, saying, I will not be a healer, for in my house is neither bread nor clothing. Make me not a ruler of the people. For Jerusalem is ruined, and Judah is fallen, become the tongue, their tongue and their doings are against the Lord, to provoke the eyes of his glory. The show of their countenance doeth witness against them, and they declare their sin as Sodom and hide it not, which we can see has happened in the entire globe now. Woe unto their soul, for they have rewarded evil unto themselves. Say ye to the righteous that it shall be well with him, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings. Woe unto the wicked, it shall be ill with him, for the reward of his hand shall be given. And as for my people, children of their oppressors, and women shall rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err and destroy the ways of thy paths. Okay, if you turn over, and all of this stuff is true in our society today, even more so than it was
A year ago.
when this was written
Oh, yeah.
in Judah. Okay, if you turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 8. Not too far, just back from Isaiah. This verse is a little less relevant, but if you look at it in an abstract way, you can see that it ties into development. Okay, if you look at verse 1 of Ecclesiastes 8, it says, Who is as the wise man, and who knoweth the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face to shine, and the boldness of his face shall be changed. And what's interesting is if you look at historically what's happened, starting with the millennial generation, there's a lot of people's actual face didn't mature. So then when they're 23, they look like a 14-year-old, but then because they're not healthy, they age quicker. So now you're seeing an interesting phenomenon where this is exaggerated with Gen Z, and there are some instances like a 27-year-old Gen Z actually can look older than a 33-year-old millennial, right? But, you know, like you saw more sophistication in people's face, and I think that that's a natural thing that comes from the development, which I think comes from maturity. Okay, now if you turn to Matthew chapter 19, which I can't remember this one. Oh yes, okay. Well, we're going to read verse 5. This is also in Genesis. Actually, we can start in verse 4 in the red. It says, Have you not read that which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And said, For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more two, but one flesh. Okay? So I do believe that there's other ways to be mature than this, but the most common way is a man and woman to be united and have a family creates maturity and development. But not if you just send the kid off into daycare. You have to actually care about the development of the kid, you know, for that to actually work. Okay, if you turn to, we got two more references here. If you turn to John chapter 16. Here is the point that I made of how when a woman traditionally has a baby, that she overcomes self. Okay, so verse 21 of John 16, Jesus saying, A woman, when she is in travail, has sorrow because her hour is come, but as soon as she is delivered of the child, she remembereth no more the anguish for joy that a man is born in the world. And the last reference is actually the most direct one, is if you turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 3. this is Paul talking about spiritual development, which I think is an interesting point, okay? And remember, meat is food. It doesn't have to be animal, okay? So verse 2, Paul says, I have fed you with milk and not with meat, for hitherto you were not able to bear it, neither are you now able. So at this point, I think I've seen enough. So if you see like the child as he develops, he eats more advanced food, right? As a Christian, you start off with a basic understanding of the commandments, then you're supposed to learn deeper concepts, right? And so I think the way that we're raising children today is everything, because of the fear culture, everything that creates development is actually not happening. It would be like just feeding the child milk indefinitely. The body wouldn't actually grow to its full cycle if you only fed the person one thing. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand there was good reasons for this to happen, because once you took God out of the culture, you saw increases in divorces. You saw there was people taking advantage of people. There was child abductions. There was more mass shootings, and so. But one thing that is interesting is, guess when these things peaked and stopped and did not increase? I don't know the exact year, but it was between the late 80s and the mid 90s. So in the last 20 years, when everybody was all paranoid about this stuff, there was actually decreases in violent crimes. It was actually technically the safest time in the history of mankind during, and then people thought, that it was the most dangerous. So there is dangers that one thing I often say is, like, nowadays with the helicopter parenting, there probably is less kids breaking their arms out in the backyard because of helicopter parenting. But then you got to ask yourself, is it worth the cost? There's a lot more kids, I think, that commit suicide from depression because they never developed their brain than there was kids that might have broke their arm. So it's not cut and dry. So what I'm advocating here doesn't necessarily create 100% perfection. Like all the regulations on houses that make housing more expensive does make better houses. The houses that are being built today are the best houses that were ever built in the history of mankind. But you got to ask yourself, is it worth having thousands upon thousands of people homeless so that we can make sure that these houses are safer?
Right.
And I think so. Kids in a helicopter parenting environment, to some degree, are safer physically because they're never going to have any interaction with the outside world. But one thing that they don't have as adults is discernment. So one thing I've seen is, like, I often thought, like, if somebody knows you, they're not going to be afraid of you. Mm-hmm. But what I've noticed in our culture now is if you represent something that someone's afraid of, then they're more concerned with the image of the fear than they are the actual fear itself. Mm-hmm. And that's because their minds haven't matured to the point where you critically think. Like, if you critically think, you get discernment and you actually care about the goodness of another person. Whereas if you don't have any critical thought, you're primarily just focused on your image. Mm-hmm. I saw this false Christian guy on a YouTube video this morning attacking this other liberal guy, right? And says, we want Trump because we want a Christian nation of good values. And he says, if I was there right now, I would kill you. And I'm like,
Those are the values we're looking for.
Yes, it's like it's surprising. I almost think your brain needs to be a little bit more mature
to not think that.
to realize the hypocrisy in the statement.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, killing somebody is not necessarily a good Christian value.
Right. Not a sign of spiritual maturity.
Not a sign of spiritual maturity, right? Loving them that bless them that curse you, you know, actually is. But it's not. It's not a scorecard of who's right and who's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you live in an apostasy, too, it's so easy to get caught up in problems. I think we need to be able to just enjoy each other. And I think it's hard for us to enjoy each other when we put the limits that you have on a 5-year-old kid on the entire culture.
Mm.
And I think this is further the like. Well, then also too, if you take like the Me Too movement, like okay, in the past you could flirt with a girl that you like out on the street. Now that's considered harassment. Wouldn't it always been harassment to a 10-year-old?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think like where the brain hasn't matured, people view all forms of affection from a stranger to be something dangerous, and I think it actually is dangerous if your mind is on that childlike level.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're thinking like an adult, you're like, I like this attention. I
Yeah.
like that this person notices me, and you can actually tell the difference if it's a
A good person or not.
right. Whereas I don't think a 10-year-old can tell
No.
the difference, and I think it would be extremely inappropriate to flirt with a 10-year-old. So then if you take a woman that's like beautiful and 18 and you flirt with her, they say that is creepy and that's sick, because it's then being viewed the same as it would be
10-year-old.
with a 10-year-old. So then we've developed a whole social value system based on the idea that our minds are like 10-year-olds. So we're not allowed to flirt. We're not allowed to talk to a stranger. We're not allowed to befriend people. Like also too, if you're 20, it's normal to be friends with a 40-year-old, right? But if you're 10, it's not normal to be friends with someone that's 20, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if you look at the age discrimination, I think a lot of that is based on the fact that people never matured beyond adolescence. So they literally feel the same uncomfortable feelings in a social interaction that a 10-year-old would if they were in the same situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, especially when it comes to male and female relationships.
Right.
And so you then say to somebody, well, okay, these fear values have only been in the culture for 20 years now. You know, in the last 6,000 years, we didn't act like this. Well, if you've never matured beyond 12, even if you're 30, those are real feelings. Like if you think back to when you were 10, you're not going to go hang. You're not going to do any of the things that are prohibited in society. So when things are abnormal, people aren't stupid. You know, so if we raise people to not develop, then they then develop values to govern society based on the people that are in it. So what I submit to you, and as I say, this is my opinion. If you think I'm wrong, that's fine. But I think that we are interacting with people in a way that would have been normal for 10-year-olds. We are basing our political opinions on a way that's normal for a 10-year-old. Like if you look at a debate, like if you take like when Donald Trump ran, right? There was like 12 people on the podium running. All of them had all kinds of political experience running the government but him, but he was the most obnoxious, made the most noise. So he, what is more popular? He's popular. So the same thing happened with Obama. You had Biden, who wasn't old at the time. You had Hillary Clinton, who had been a senator, who had been the first lady, and a lawyer. You had Biden, who had 30 years experience. You had Biden, who had like 5 years experience. Say, we want a black guy. What do you think is more popular? I think the black guy is more popular. Okay, we're gonna vote in the Biden because he's black, right? Nothing wrong with that. Like, I think Condoleezza Rice was one of the best Secretary of States, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think you should vote for someone because they're a woman or because they're black. You want to pick somebody based on their, the qualifications. So at that time, Biden clearly had, the best qualifications. But a 10-year-old doesn't think, who has the most qualifications?
Mm-hmm.
And then a 10-year-old, if you say, well, the opponent, like if you're in well, I even heard Governor Newsom of California say that Trump called him by a name that kids called him in 7th grade.
Yes. Yes.
And I think if you're not mature, if you hear somebody calling somebody names, calling people stupid, I think at age 10, 11, 12, that feels normal.
Yeah.
But I think you're supposed to grow beyond that.
Right.
And I think when we're adults, we're able to formulate relationships with good people. We don't feel that we need to be segregated based on race, class, political opinions,
Mm-hmm.
age.
Right.
I think what matters the most is compatibility, how well you can connect, and the values that a person has. So if you know someone has really good values, that should supersede their political views. It should, you should want to be friends with somebody that's a good person regardless of their age. But we're not saying this to the 4th graders.
Right. Yeah.
And you also, if you're a 4th grader, you're not necessarily expected to take on responsibility. So if you're a 4th grader, it's not your job to put food on the table.
Right.
If you're a 4th grader, you do not want the responsibility of a child. You want to be able to do your own thing, right? So nowadays, people don't want kids. People don't want families. People don't want closeness. If you're a 4th grader, you don't want to be intimately close to another person. You're not ready for that type of relationship. So the fear culture has caused people to not want close intimacy. So I just thought it was an interesting observation to see that the modern culture is hindering development, and the hindering of development hinders joy, hinders discernment, hinders intimacy, hinders maturity, and hinders growth. And I believe that it's on an unsustainable path. And if you look at the baby boomers, I believe that they never made it to the full maturity. And if you look at millennials and Gen Z, I don't even think they hit the medium ground. I think they are on the 4th to 5th grade level of maturity. I think Gen Xers and baby boomers are in the adolescent 14 to 18-year-old. And I learned it with myself. Like, I hit maturity in many levels, but I didn't in the relationship because I'd never been married or had a kid. So then I find someone that I perceive as a loving person, and it's like my whole mind changes. Like, I'm a different person. I'm not focused on lust of the eyes. I'm like, oh yeah, like this is what maturity is. I think what happens is that it's normal. You start off, you get excited about visual stimulation, then you become an adult, and then you get more focused on the selfless, practical, long life information. And I think now, when people are looking for a spouse, they're saying, I want, like a girl saying, I want a guy that's 10 inches taller than me, that makes over 6 figures. Guys are saying they're looking for a girl that, has this look or that look, or as one of the guys that can play sports and stuff. And these are all things that you would want playing on the playground, right? These are not traits that you're looking for to have a good family, to be a good parent. These are not traits you look at for good character. So people, if you look at what's motivating people to get together on dating apps, they're almost fostering, the dating apps are fostering the immaturity. They're looking for a superficial criteria in order to meet somebody and getting rid of all the deep things. And I dare say that that hinders growth and maturity, because what really should matter to you is a person good. What is their character? How godly are they? How honest are they? How loving are they? Those are the things that should attract you to another human being.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not what is being celebrated today. What's being celebrated today is what, when I was a kid, is how people looked at things in high school. But once a girl got in college, she then started focusing on her future. She said, am I going to have a good family with this person? Would he be a good father? Will he be a good provider? Etc., etc. I don't think out of high school people are making that transition. And I think my age group started a little late, maybe 2 or 3 years later than they should. But I think the key thing that drives the maturity is responsibility. I think as a parent, as your kid hits a physical developmental age, it should be accompanied by responsibility. And I don't mean ridiculous responsibility, but I mean enough so that their brains develop and their minds mature. So basically, this message, I think, ties into the apostasy. And like I said, if anybody wanted to make a comment, if you think I'm wrong, if you think everybody is maturing as well as they did in the past, I'd love to hear it. Or if you think that this is a good point, maybe, we don't have hardly anybody watching these videos, maybe we could, try to spread this information around. But next week will be, thus saith the Lord, we will be reading Ephesians, so anyone that's following can pre-read the book of the 6 chapters of Ephesians. So dear God, I pray that we learn to look at your nature as a part of our growth and maturity and see the virtues of how you made us in order to help overcome the apostasy. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.